So the topic tonight is growth through challenges. And this is a topic that I enjoy speaking about because it's something that I try to live by these ideas that I'm going to speak about now. And obviously there's a lot that we can discuss about this, but I'm going to try to tackle this subject from a few different angles. Sarah, can I be seen well on this? Is it good?
Yes, we see you well. I'm just gonna put everybody on mute, and then you could just unmute yourself. Okay, everyone's on mute. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay, so I like to start by mentioning a short little video that Rabbi Avram Twersky, very famous psychiatrist, Dr. Rabbi Abraham Twersky, posted on the internet a few years ago. And the entire video is 90 seconds long. And you can find it if you look on YouTube right now or afterwards. You can find this video. And the concept, I'll find you the name of the video. The concept behind this video was adversity. Let me just look at the exact title that he used for it. Growth through adversity, basically the same title of our lecture today. And Rabbi Twersky makes a very interesting observation. And he says that if we look at the way a lobster grows, we can learn a lot about how we as human beings can grow. And it's interesting, a lobster is very soft, but it has a hard shell around it. And the hard shell of the lobster, one could ask, how does the lobster grow if it has a hard shell? What allows the lobster to grow? And as Rabbi Twersky points out, the lobster, as it grows, gets very uncomfortable in its own skin, underneath the shell. And at a certain point, it pushes off the shell. And at that point, it grows, and an additional shell comes on the lobster. And then the lobster continues to grow, become uncomfortable under its shell, push off the shell, and continues to grow. And he makes an interesting observation. He says that if the lobster would have chosen to take a Valium, maybe even to go to some therapist, and not actually tackled the issues, or put it this way, not actually allow themselves to continue to grow, they never would have pushed off the outer shell. And the concept behind this is that for a person to really grow, and this little video went viral, and hundreds of thousands of people saw it, and literally went viral all over the internet, because there's a strong message. There's a strong message behind this. And that is that for a person to really grow, they have to be willing to be somewhat uncomfortable. And I'm going to discuss this from, like I said, from a few different angles. I'd like to start by mentioning a very interesting idea that I heard from my father. Tonight's topic was advertised as geared for married couples. If someone's on this call who's not married, I'm sure they'll benefit as well. But I'm going to use some practical applications to marriage, because I know specifically during this time, a lot of couples are struggling with different aspects of what the quarantine, of being in the same space as their spouse for such a long period of time, and other different challenges that came about specifically during this period of the pandemic. So I'm going to apply certain aspects specifically to marriage, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about applies to every person, every situation, or many situations. So my father, in many of his classes based on the Sfas Emes, talks about these ideas, and he's really part of the inspiration for what I'm speaking about today. And I asked him a short time ago. I said, how would you define growth through challenges? So he said something very beautiful, and he said that in essence, the human being is very much like that lobster. The human being is Ein Sof. We are infinity. We have literally unlimited potential and are unlimited what we can do. And then we're living in the world of Sof. We're living in the world of limitation. And these two things, in a certain sense, every time a person has a challenge, it's their Ein Sof hitting the Sof. It's the infinity hitting the limitations. And when we hit that limitation, when we get to that point where we hit the limitation, we feel stuck. We feel stuck. And if you think about it, let's say a person is challenged by a family member, causing them to feel impatient, or they become impatient around certain family members, or a job that they're in, or different situations that they have that are challenging them. In essence, the way he was putting it, I think it's a very beautiful way to look at it, is there's an Ein Sof, that there's an infinity that's being pushed up against a sense of limitation. And there's a beautiful example the Sfas Emes uses to describe this. We know that the tzitzis, according to the Torah, the only garment that really has to have tzitzis is the four-cornered garment, which today we really don't wear a four-cornered garment except to have the mitzvah of tzitzis. And at the corner of the tzitzis, we are supposed to put the strings, the white strings, and the blue strings. Now, recently, in the last 50 years, many scientists and rabbis believe that we found the original blue string, the techelas, that comes from a snail, and there's very strong evidence to it. I wear the blue that comes from the snail, and the way the techelas is supposed to be on the tzitzis is that you have the white strings, and then you have the blue coming out basically from the white. And the Sfas Emes says, why is it that on a four-cornered garment we have a mitzvah to put the tzitzis with the techelas, with the blue? So the Medrash tells us that the blue is supposed to remind us, it's supposed to be on the tzitzis, is that you have the white string, and then you have the blue coming out basically from the white. And the Sfas Emes says, why is it that on a four-cornered garment we have a mitzvah to put the tzitzis with the techelas, with the blue? I'm sorry, something tells us that the blue is supposed to be on the tzitzis, is that you have the white string, and then you have the I apologize for that. I think something went wrong, but I think we're okay now. Can everyone hear me? Can you guys hear me? Somebody just turn on your screen and put your thumb up so I can know that you can hear me. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So the techela, the blue string, is specific. So the Midrash tells us that why does a person it tells us that the blue is supposed to remind us of the ocean, which reminds us of the kisei hakavod, the seat that God sits on, and basically the blue is supposed to connect us straight to the shamayim, straight to heaven. So the Sfas Emes tells us that on the four-cornered garment, at that point, what does that symbolize? It symbolizes a place in your life where you feel limited, a place in your life where you feel stuck, where you feel like I can't go anywhere, I'm stuck, I'm at a corner. And exactly at that point, you have the blue string that reminds us of the Ein Sof, that reminds us of the infinity that lives inside of all of us, and the unbelievable potential that each and every one of us have. So one aspect of looking at challenges is this idea of the Ein Sof and the Sof, of the limitations and really at a very deep level are almost unlimited potential. I'd like to talk a little bit about some practical ideas about this. And one of the ideas I'd like to share with you is a very, very interesting study that I saw recently, where they did a very large study of hundreds of thousands of people, trying to find the people who have what they would consider every aspect of success. They have financial success, they have physical success, emotional success, they're happy. They're like the people that have it all. Not only are they financially well off, they're physically healthy and they're emotionally healthy, and they have a purpose in life, and everything seems to be right. And they tried to find a common denominator of those people. What is unique about those people that seem to have it all? And the only thing that they found that was common denominator of all those people was every one of them had gone through a significant challenge in their life. Every single one of them had gone through a challenge. And when we talk about growth through challenges, a lot of it has to do with this concept. So in essence, we often look at our challenges as a necessary evil. We look at our challenge as, I wish I didn't have to have this problem. I wish I didn't have to go through this difficulty. Partially, this has to do with our society's perspective that we look for quick fixes. We look for solutions that we believe that, oh, this is going to solve all the problems. I don't want to get into politics right now, but if you look at what's happening with the riots and the whole approach that the media and the society is taking to these real issues, it's quick fix solutions to very, very significant and real issues. And we tend to look at our challenges as being, I wish I could live a life without any challenges at all. There's a very interesting author, Malcolm Gladwell, wrote very interesting books about psychology and business, and very interesting. I highly recommend his books. And in one of his books, he discusses a certain boy who grew up, he was dyslexic, he had a very hard time reading, and this boy somehow found himself on Wall Street. He went to Wall Street. He was barely, I think he was maybe 20 years old. He went to Wall Street, and he basically found a way to hitch a ride to the airport with a very high level person in, I believe, in Goldman Sachs. And somehow through that car ride, he convinced the person to give him a start, give him a try in his company in investing. And this person became Gary Cohn, who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. And interestingly enough, in the studies that Malcolm Gladwell did, a huge proportion of people with dyslexia become very highly successful in life, much higher than the amount of people you would think, even if those people did not have any handicap. People with dyslexia have a considerably higher chance of becoming very successful in life. And again, you would think if you're growing up with dyslexia, and even till today, Gary Cohn, I think what I've read, has a very hard time reading till today. But he managed to become very, very successful at what he does, not just in spite of his challenges, but I would say through his challenges. Through his challenges, he managed to become what he became. There's an idea that I share with couples when I give my relationship class before marriage. And one of the concepts I share is an idea that I call marriage is not supposed to be comfortable, but it's supposed to be very pleasurable. And understanding the difference between comfort and pleasure. And this is a very, very important thing today in our society, because we live in a society that's extremely comfort driven. We are constantly looking for comfort. We want things to be as easy as possible. We want technology to make our life as easy as possible. The goal is to exert as little effort as possible. And we live in this very, very comfort-driven society. But the reality is that as human beings, we're created, we're not comfort beings, we're pleasure beings. Now, pleasure doesn't just mean a physical pleasure. Pleasure also means much higher levels of pleasure that a person can have pleasure by accomplishing something, by making a difference to the world, by bringing a smile to someone's face. All of these things can give a person tremendous amounts of pleasure. We as a human being, we are driven to have pleasure, not driven to live in comfort. When we're comfortable, we actually feel depressed. We actually feel down. A certain level of comfort is not bad, but when a person is driven to live just in comfort, they do not necessarily feel happy at all. And one of the things I share in my marriage class is the idea that marriage is not supposed to be comfortable, but is supposed to be very pleasurable. And we have to switch those ideas in our brain. We have to change our mindset from being a comfort-driven mindset to a pleasure, purpose-driven mindset. The Gemara tells us if a person makes 1 bushel of wheat from their own field, it's more valuable to them than 10 bushels that someone gives you as a gift. Where is the pleasure that you get from making something on your own? But it seems that there is a pleasure there. There's a pleasure when a person accomplishes something, there's a pleasure. When you get a degree, you see that degree on the wall and you know how hard it was to go through that. When you see a child who you put so much effort into bringing up, living a certain way, there's a tremendous, almost unlimited amount of pleasure that you get from that. But that's not comfortable. Nobody would argue that bringing up a child is comfortable, but it can be very pleasurable. I often quote the Atlantic magazine study that they did where they asked people, who is happier, those with children or those without children? Those with a loved one that they have to take care of, a mother or father who has to take care of, or those who don't have an elderly loved one that they have to take care of? And across the board, those without children and those without the loved one to take care of were happier. But when they asked the question differently and they said, who has a lasting sense of happiness, not a superficial, I'm happy, I'm free, I could do whatever I want, but who has a real deeper sense of happiness, then it switched the other way. And those who had the loved one to take care of, those who were actually in a position where they had to exert a lot of effort, had a much more lasting and meaningful, real deep happiness. You know, our America was built on the concept of pursuit of happiness. But the problem with this happiness is that very often the happiness is a very superficial kind of happiness, and not a deep, meaningful, purposeful happiness. So, you know, another study, just very, very interesting study that they've done, Sean Archer and others have done this study where they asked people who won the lottery. 2 years after winning the lottery, were they happier than the ones who didn't win the lottery? I'm talking about a significant lottery. And statistically, they were not happier. It was the same. Some were happier, some were less happy, but they were the same level of happiness as those who did not win the lottery. That may not come as such a surprise to everyone because we all know that winning the lottery is not necessarily a solution to a lot of problems can come from that. But interestingly enough, they did a study with people who became, God forbid, paraplegics, who lost their ability to use the lower half of their body. And the same results were found, that 2 years later, initially there was a tremendous drop-off in their happiness, but 2 years later, their happiness level was the same as the ones who did not become a paraplegic. That means, just picture this for a moment, because it's hard for me to wrap my head around this. That means they lost their ability probably to drive, they lost their ability to walk, they lost their ability to play sports, they lost their ability to walk, to do 90% of the actions that they were able to do before. And yet their happiness level is the same on average as it was before. And the only reason that this is the case, that I can believe, the only reason is because before they weren't truly happy. Before they were happy because of this, because something happened, because something came their way, because of something that wasn't real. And now it caused them to see, what is my real happiness? There's a very, very interesting memoir of Christopher Reeves, where he talks about his life after he became a quadriplegic. And he had everything. He had the money, the looks, anything that a person can imagine, the fame. And then he became a quadriplegic. He lost his entire ability to use his body, except he could speak with a voice machine, and he could use one finger. And he writes in his memoir that initially he didn't want to live at all. And then, as many of you know, he became a spokesman for people with quadriplegic, with spinal injuries. And at the end of his life, he very famously said that if I had a choice to have this not happen to me, I would not have taken that choice. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute, because again, every time I say this, I still can't fully believe that this is the case. But he said, if I had a choice of this not happening to me, I would not have taken that choice. Because he said, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew my value. I thought I knew who I was. But then when that all was pulled away from me, I realized what my true value is. And going back to this the discussion about growth and happiness. So when we talk about comfort, right? So this in this class I give about marriage, I say marriage is not supposed to be comfortable, but is supposed to be very pleasurable. So if a person is looking for comfort, marriage is not a very good place to go to. Why? Because you're going to have conflict, there's going to be issues, there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be different things that will come up over time in a relationship. However, if a person is looking to grow and to become a greater person through their life experiences, then marriage is an unbelievable opportunity for growth, right? One of the things that I teach as well is that marriage is supposed to be about growth. Life is supposed to be about growth. The reason why the Torah puts such an emphasis on us getting married is not just so we should have children. That's obviously an important part of it, but it's because we are supposed to grow as people. And when you bring another person into your life, you expand yourself to allow another person to come into your life. You have grown, and it challenges you to constantly grow. When you have children, it challenges you to grow. It challenges you to become a greater and better person. Kabbalistically, they say the reason why you have to be married 9 months before you can have a child is because you need 9 months of marriage to become less selfish, to bring a child into the world that'll make you even less selfish. And then when that child starts talking back to you, you'll become even a little bit less selfish as you hopefully grow from your other experiences and how to deal with the child and how to deal with all of this. Children and spouses have a way of getting under our skin that other people cannot, because they understand us, they know us, they know what we're about, and sometimes that's hard to hear. If we have a mindset that we're in this world to grow, that our purpose in this world is to grow, it unbelievably changes every aspect of who we are in life and definitely in marriage. In a recent class that I gave, I spoke about a very, very interesting book that my son introduced me to called Mindset by Carl Dweck. And in this book, Mindset, Carl Dweck talks about two different ways of thinking: a fixed mindset way of looking at the world and a growth mindset way of looking at the world. And many people probably fit somewhere in the middle, or in some areas they're fixed and some areas they're growth. This book has taken education by storm, business by storm, and it actually is now being used in relationship guidance and marriage counseling as well. What is the concept? The concept is there are some people who everything has to fit within a framework of their perspective. This is a fixed perspective. A growth perspective is, I can grow, I can expand, I can become something different than the way I was before. Judaism very much emphasizes a growth perspective. If a person has a growth perspective, it changes so many things. One of the studies Carl Dweck talks about is a lower income school in an urban school in California, where the students were literally way below grade average. And this principal came in with this growth-oriented mindset and had third graders reading Shakespeare. People that it didn't make any sense that they were able to do the math that they were doing, were doing extremely, extremely well, because she took a growth-oriented perspective to their studies and to their education. Very often when people get married, they have a perspective, and this can be given to us by Hollywood, this can be given to us by the comfort-driven society we live in, and the perspective is, my spouse is supposed to do X, marriage is supposed to look like this, we are supposed to do this, this is how it's supposed to look, and if it doesn't look like that, something's wrong. Sometimes it's because that's what they saw with their parents' marriage, and they expect their marriage to be the same. It could be many different reasons why we have these ideas. But these fixed mindset ideas cause a tremendous amount of stress to our relationships. And if we can switch to a growth-oriented perspective to marriage, and have a perspective. And I'm just going to read you a few lines here. Often people have a perspective. You deserve to be with somebody who makes you happy. So, and this is actually a recently someone showed me this on a social media post that said the following: you deserve to be with somebody who makes you happy, somebody who doesn't complicate your life, somebody who won't hurt you. Like, this is a right. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. You deserve to be with somebody who makes you happy, someone who doesn't complicate your life, and somebody who won't hurt you. Now, this kind of quote is so damaging to our relationship. So damaging because the quote, basically the message, the idea behind it, what's the message? The message is that I should expect everything to be just so. And if it isn't just so, something's wrong with this relationship, something's wrong over here, right? A much healthier perspective that one can and should take is to look at life not from a fixed perspective, but from a growth perspective of what about the situation can challenge me to grow as a person, to become a more patient person, a kinder person, a better person. I believe that the Torah wants us to be growth oriented. And I believe that, I very often ask my students, I say, what's more important, your actions or your beliefs? And it's a bit of a trick question because we know that you need to have beliefs for your actions to have a meaning. But I believe that your actions are more important than your beliefs because your actions actually define you. The way you live your life changes who you are as a person. When you do acts of kindness, you become a kinder person. When you act more patiently, you become a more patient person. And this type of growth mindset makes a very, very, very big difference. When a person is in a challenging situation, and this quarantine was extremely challenging for so many people. I think for everyone it was challenging, but for some people it was more challenging than for others. But when a person's in a situation where they're challenged, they used to be their spouse was going to work every day, and now their spouse is home with them all the time, and they don't have space for each other, and they're feeling like they're claustrophobic in that space, or they're feeling frustrated by not understood, etc. Whatever it is that's bothering them, there's an opportunity to go outside of yourself and to grow and to build your character in a way that if you were not under that challenge, you wouldn't have the opportunity to do. Now, I know this sounds good and this sounds nice, but what I'm suggesting is that if a person really, really takes this perspective and this mindset, it literally is it's a game changer in how they live their life and how their marriage plays out and how every aspect of their life plays out. I want to share this from personal experience. I believe that this growth-oriented mindset is like a muscle. Okay, we had a charity event at Emet a few weeks ago, and a big thank you to everyone who participated and even just anyone who was part of it in any way. During that event, we had a live production going on, which I really hope to continue. It was really amazing production. A big shout out to Kaiko Media for organizing that and helping us with that. And during that production, one of my close students, friends, and partners in Emet, Alex Babachanov, spoke the last night of the campaign. And he said something which I've shared this, but the way he said it, I couldn't say it better. And he said that giving is a muscle. And just like if you don't build up your muscles, you will not have muscles. And then when somebody says to you, can you pick up this 20-pound bag? You'll say, no, I can't pick up the 20-pound bag. It's too heavy. And a person who does not experience what giving can do, they're literally not able to give. It's not that they don't want to give, they can't give because they don't have the muscles. And I think it's such a beautiful way of looking at giving, which is so much a part of growth and so much a part of marriage is about giving. But I think the same thing is very true in the growth in every aspect of our growth. If we look at growing, if we look at challenges as opportunities to grow from a perspective of like, it's again, as a muscle. If you look at a challenge and you're able to train yourself as a challenge comes up and say to yourself, oh my gosh, there's another opportunity here. There's an opportunity for me to grow. There's an opportunity for me to become a greater person. And this is not something that happens easily. It's not something that you just like snap a switch and you become growth oriented or you have this perspective. But I believe the perspective to look at challenges as growth opportunities, which unfortunately is so against modern society, so against what unfortunately our culture and our society has become, which is the quick fix, just shut your brain off, just do this, and don't think, just do whatever. No, as little effort as possible. But if a person can train themselves, that when there's a challenge, whether it's between them and their spouse, between them and their children, them and their boss, them and themselves, if they get to a situation in life where they feel depressed, they feel down, they feel anxious, and they're able to look into themselves and say, you know what? How can I grow from this challenge? How can I grow from this experience? If we take that mindset, it's a game changer in how we can become better people, and literally every problem we face in life becomes an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to make ourselves and the world around us a better place. And I think that if we can try to take this perspective, it really changes a tremendous amount of, and it's literally a game changer. I'd like to just share a few other ideas, and then if people have questions, I can open it to questions. One of the tools, or so to speak, or one of the approaches to having to grow through your challenges, to be able to grow through your challenges, is to be clear about what your purpose is. Okay, to be clear about what is your purpose? What am I doing this for? Because very often in life, we don't have that so clear. We don't really know so clearly, why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm just going through the motions because everyone goes through the motions, and I'm just doing my thing and having breakfast and having lunch and taking the kids and going here and coming here and going there. And I don't really have a purpose. I'm not really living with a clear vision of my purpose. And if a person has that, it's much, much harder to deal with challenges if you don't have clarity about your purpose. If you have that clarity and you have a clearer purpose, mission, goals, you're much more motivated to get there and to feel successful and to be able to overcome your challenges in getting to that point. If we think about it for a moment, right? What is the point of marriage? Right? What is the point? What is the point of a person getting married? And again, if a person has a mindset of I deserve this, I need this, and all those type of things, it's going to make it much more difficult. But if they have a mindset of I want to grow, I want to build, I want to expand beyond myself, it will change the dynamic tremendously. Another thing I would just add as well, very often in life, when something is going wrong, we tend to take out our stress on other people. And when we do that, it tends to escalate and the situation gets worse. One of the important things to try to do in a stressful situation is to look into yourself, remain open, positive, problem-solving state. And very often when you have that perspective, the answers will flow to you, and you'll realize that so much of what you're able to do is already in your control. You know, we get very frustrated when we feel lack of control. But when we realize that very often we do have the control, and the control really is in how we react to a situation. One of the things I often mention to couples is, it's interesting in life, we don't really have an ability to see our own face, right? We see someone else's face, we don't see our own face. So very often in life what happens, let's say you're upset about something, but you may not even realize that you're upset. You come home from work, your wife or your spouse sees that you're upset, and your spouse was actually in a good mood, but your spouse is sort of mirroring off you, and the spouse gets a little bit down, and then you're like, why are you down? And you actually blame the person for responding to what you actually brought to the table. You're the one who was down to begin with, and you blame the other person for mirroring that back on you. You know, there's a tendency very often to overreact to situations. You know, I often tell people that most people live their life either underreacting or overreacting, but rarely actually reacting appropriately, right? And if we're constantly in those overreaction or underreaction type of situation, we're setting ourselves up not to have that sense of growth and sense of control and sense of perspective like that. So just to sort of summarize everything that we've been talking about, a person should strive to have a growth-oriented perspective, to see themselves as not a fixed object, but actually as someone who can grow. You know, the Hebrew word for man is Adam. Why is man called Adam? Because Kabbalistically we say that man and earth have one thing in common. They both have potential. The definition of man, of a human being, is potential. When Adam, or the first man, was created, the Midrash tells us that the angels thought they were seeing God himself. The angels literally thought they were seeing God, because just like God has unlimited potential, we have almost unlimited potential, unlike the angels that don't have unlimited potential. When Hashem creates man, it says that he created man in his image. And what's the only thing we know about Hashem at the point of Bereshis when he creates man? There's only one thing we know about Hashem. We don't know that he's compassionate and kind, and we don't know those things. We only know one thing. What's the only thing we know about Hashem? We know that Hashem is a creator. And if he's a creator and created us in his image, that means that we are creators. Our definition, our essence is we are creator. And how do we create? We create through our actions, we create through our challenges, we create when we get to a situation and we feel stuck, like the corner of that garment, we feel stuck, and we, like the lobster, push off that thing that holds us back and allow ourselves to grow, allow ourselves to become greater than we thought was even possible. And if we have this perspective, this growth-oriented perspective, literally the biggest challenges become the biggest blessings. And you know, one of the things that I'm sure many of you on this call or will be watching this recording later will probably appreciate is that during this quarantine, during this pandemic, we were challenged in so many different ways. But I really believe that if you have a growth-oriented perspective, you're able to see the blessings even in the limitations. You're able to see how we're pushed to spend more time with our family members. We were pushed to connect with ourselves in a deeper way than we were otherwise. Things that we just took for granted, like we have to have huge weddings and all these things, are now being questioned. Maybe we don't need those things. Maybe they're not that important. What's really important? You know, I'm getting phone calls left and right from people calling me and telling me, Rabbi, I want to start keeping Shabbos now. Just out of the blue, I want to start keeping Shabbos. I want to put my kids in yeshiva. I want to live a more meaningful, purposeful life. People calling me and all of our staff at Emet, many, you know, a whole group of students from St. John's University, right in the beginning of the pandemic, as a group, they decided we want to keep Shabbos stronger than we did before. Many of them weren't keeping Shabbos at all, and they said, we want to start keeping Shabbos now. Because they realized, which is a true testament to who they are, they realized like what's really important, what's really meaningful to our lives. And had we not gone through those challenges, I don't think we'd necessarily be able to appreciate. And I really believe that our mission, our job in this world is to grow. Our job is to grow. Every moment that we're alive, we're supposed to be growing. Every moment we're alive, we have to be in a state of growth. If we're not growing, we're dying. There's only two options. And to grow very often doesn't fit with the mindset that we thought it had to be. To grow is to take the challenges that we're faced in front of us, to take the opportunity and look at them as opportunities and to use them as ways to grow and to become stronger, to use them as ways to build our muscles, to build like the lobster, to break through at that limitation that we had before and rise up to a different level of growth that we may not have never even thought was possible. Rabbi Schaefer very often quotes the famous example of the 4-minute mile, right? Everyone thought that it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile. There were books written why you cannot run a 4-minute mile. And then in the mid-1950s, the first runner ran a 4-minute mile. And then the last half of that year, another 40 people ran a 4-minute mile. And now it's an expectation that a good runner runs a 4-minute mile. But we put that limitation on ourselves because people thought they couldn't do it, and therefore they couldn't do it. And this is just one small example of the limitations that we very, very often put on ourselves. Sometimes it's because of our childhood environments at home. Sometimes it's because of the schools we went to that somebody like never taught us that we can believe in ourselves. Whatever it is that's holding a person back, if we can put into our mind that we have so much potential, and therefore the challenges we face are the learning opportunities, the growth opportunities to build our character, to build ourselves, to strengthen our core. It's an unbelievable game changer that literally there is literally nothing that can come your way that cannot help you grow. Somebody asked a question. I'm going to address the question if I can open it. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Let me just try to open the question. Hold on. Technical difficulties here. Okay, for some reason I don't seem to be able to see the questions on this device that I'm on.
I don't see any questions.
Oh no, the questions are being asked to me privately. Okay, here they are. Okay. How do you suggest to handle a situation where you feel like you're the only spouse working on yourself? In other words, this is a very, very common question that people ask me. How do you deal with the situation where you feel you're the only one who's working? I'm going to just say the other question as well. A person said, my question is in general, not necessarily related to a spouse. What is it that one can say to oneself during an anger or anxiety attack? Like, what if you get so angry to the point that you know that you should tell yourself to calm down, and you go over all the lecture in your head from what you listen to and do the breathing, and you know it's wrong, but you just can't hold the anger back, and anger becomes anxiety, and you're drowning in this. What do you do? Okay, so basically, I'm going to answer the first question first. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'm going to answer the first question first. So what if you feel you're the only person who's working on the relationship? This is a question that I've been asked many times. And I'll tell you how I feel the right answer is. First and foremost, you may think that you're the only person working on the situation, but you may actually be wrong, because the other person might be working on it more than you are. It's just in the areas that they're working on it, those things are easy for you. Okay, and I cannot underestimate this enough. Okay, we see things from our perspective. So if for you, it's easy to be patient, and your spouse, it's difficult for them to be patient, or for you, it's easy to communicate, and your spouse, it's hard for them to communicate, you're going to look at communication as an easy thing, and the fact that they're not communicating means that they don't care. But the truth is, you're a very different person than they are. And I would just say to that person who asked the question, is be very, very careful in this area. Because again, we tend to look at things from our perspective, and very often we get frustrated because we feel our spouse doesn't care, because if they cared, they would do things the way we do things. But the problem with that logic is that you didn't marry yourself. If you married yourself, okay, then that would make sense. But you married a different person who has different challenges than you. And what's easy for you may be hard for them. What's hard for you may be easy for them. So just keep that in mind and try to remember that, and give them the benefit of the doubt. And if you realize this, again, there are some situations where one spouse just doesn't care. Maybe they gave up on the relationship. Maybe there are other even worse reasons that they don't care. It's possible. But keep in mind that there definitely are situations, and I know many, many, many of them like this, where we assumed that we knew what it was for the other person, but we didn't have a clue how hard it is for that other person. Like, I'll give you an example. Situation I was involved with recently. A woman grew up in a house where there was tremendous amount of negativity in that house. Tremendous amount of negativity. So she went into her marriage with a lot of negativity, and seeing things as like the world's against me, and seeing things with a bad eye, and all this kind of like an eye and ra, and all these type of things. And even though her husband, actually, I can say this as a fact, did so much for her, in her mind, she really saw the negatives just stood out so much, and a certain amount of paranoia that she had, and she saw him very negatively, which obviously hurt the relationship a lot. But this particular person went through a lot of effort to work on seeing things positive, took positive thinking classes and a lot of different things. Now, this person still has a long way to go. But I think what that spouse needs to know, and what I tried sharing with the husband in this particular case, is that you may not realize that for where your spouse went from before to where they are now, it was a tremendous change, tremendous change. So this is very important to keep in mind. I'll just share with you a brief little sort of humorous account of this type of situation. My wife and I taught a Chatan and Kala many years ago, very special couple. We're still very much in touch with them. And I was learning with the guy, my wife Shani was learning with the wife and with the fiance. And about 3 weeks before the wedding, the fiance mentioned to my wife, and she says, my husband, the groom, the Chatan, hasn't said I love you to me yet. And she said, I know he loves me, but he never said the words I love you. And my wife told me this, so I made up to speak to the guy about it. I didn't say that I knew anything, but I said, I mentioned to the guy, I just said something like, have you bought your fiance flowers? And he's like, just to understand a little bit about this guy, very nice person, not so communicative, not so emotionally expressive, works in a high-level position in a firm in Manhattan, like in an actuary accounting type firm. And he said, no, is it important to buy her flowers? I'm like, yeah, it's important. And then he's like, I asked him, do you give her a card? He's like, no, I never gave her a card. Is that important? So it was Thursday night, and I said to him, tomorrow before Shabbat, I want you to buy her flowers and give her a card. I'm going to follow up with you Saturday night to make sure you did. Saturday night, I called him, and I said, did you buy her flowers? He goes, we went to the florist, and the florist, to finalize arrangement for the wedding, the florist gave her flowers. So he was like, okay, I'm putter, I'm off the hook. And I said, did you give her a card? And he's like, no. So I dug a little deeper, and I asked him, I said, did she give you a card? He's like, a card? She wrote me a book. She wrote him a 29-page letter of all the different things that she loves about him and all the dreams that they have together. And I realized that he feels whatever he gives her is nothing compared to what she gives him on this communication side. And therefore, he doesn't even try because he feels like I can't do anything compared to it. But what I showed him is that because she knows that this is hard for you, even if you make a small amount of effort in this regard, it's going to feel like gold to her. And this is because she knew that this was a challenge for him. But I do think it's very important to keep this in mind and to be conscious of what is maybe easy for us could be a challenge for our spouse. Just going to the other question for a minute. So the question was, let me just find the question again for a second. If a person has anxiety, I don't know why I'm having a hard time finding the notes. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, I'm using a device that I don't usually use, my son's Kindle. And, I got it, hold on. Beautiful, okay. So if a person is angry if you get so angry to the point that you should know that you should tell yourself to calm down, and you go over all the lecture in your head and do the breathing, and you know it's wrong, but you just can't hold this anger back, and anger becomes anxiety, and you're drowning in this, what do? Is there anything to do at this point to stop yourself from losing yourself into a spiral of anxiety, anger, and frustration? So there's obviously a lot to this question. I would suggest that this person could probably benefit from seeing a therapist. But I'll just say the following. Very often, if a person finds himself with this type of anger, anxiety, like just swallowed up in like an emotional mess, the issue is that they're allowing themselves, or they've allowed themselves to live in this type of stress for way too long. We can very often get used to a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety and unhealthy behavior, and we don't even notice that it's a problem because we're so used to it, we just understand, we expect it. And potentially, and I don't know this person's situation, but potentially the solution may lie, like I said, in going to therapy, but even not going to therapy, it may lie in really becoming a calmer person. One of the things I strongly suggest is doing like aerobic exercise, walking at 45 minutes a day, very fast walking, different things like this that calm a person down, put them more in perspective. The person says that they're doing deep breathing, but are they doing deep breathing when they're already stressed out, when they're already anxious? If a person's already in the state of a panic attack and they start doing deep breathing, they're pretty late to do it. But if they can train themselves to calm their breathing down, one of the benefits of aerobic exercise is that your resting heart rate can go pretty low. And when your resting heart rate is low, that actually calms you down. It calms your heart, it calms you down tremendously, and your breathing. So one of the suggestions I would have is trying to make changes in your daily pattern of your life. Like, for example, waking up a half hour earlier than you normally do and spending that half hour with positive visualizations about your life, with prayer, with making sure you drink enough water, all these type of things, starting off your day, even if you're tired, even went to sleep at 2 a.m, wake up a half hour earlier so you can get your day off to a better start, see things in a healthier, more positive direction. And sometimes that can help from getting into the very stressful situation. Okay, another question over here is, okay, what if you don't have the will or correct tools to grow through your challenges? What if you don't have the will or correct tools to grow through your challenges? So my answer to that person's question is, just the fact that you recognize that you don't have the will or the tools, you're 80% ahead of the game, or maybe 90% ahead of the game. The biggest issue very often in life is not realizing that you even have a problem. So if you realize that you have a problem, like I said, you're way ahead of the game. You may need a coach, you may need like a chavruta, like a study partner, somebody to like push you, to motivate you. And I'll say something else that I think is really, really crucial. Very often in life, the reason why, and I'm speaking for myself, I think it's true for many others, the reason why we don't grow is because we set the bar too high. We're too much of a perfectionist. We expect too much from ourselves and from our spouse, because our spouse is so close to us, so we expect it from our spouse. We expect so much from each other that because we have such high expectations, we don't allow ourselves to make that little next step of growth, that little bit of growth. I was just talking to Rabbi Kraft, my co-director at Emmett, about this. He said that the shmooze that he heard from the Rabbinic Leibowitz, exactly about this idea, that the most important aspect of growth is that little bit outside of our comfort zone, the little bit of growth that pushes us to do a little bit beyond. And I think that this is a very, very crucial point when we talk about growth. That growth is not comparing yourself to another person, not comparing yourself to what you used to do when you were a teenager, not comparing yourself to your parents or to anyone else. It's comparing yourself to your own self, and small, tangible areas of growth are extremely, extremely important. They're extremely important in a relationship because, like I said before, in a relationship, our spouse wants to see that we care. More than anything else, like in our relationship with Hashem, Hashem wants to know that we care. Our spouse wants to know that we care. We say in the Shema, "B'chol levav, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol mo'odecha." But it has to start with levavcha. If we don't show that we care, the most expensive diamonds, most expensive jewels, it will not mean anything because we don't care. So if you show that you care, and sometimes to show that you care, especially if you're hopefully living with a not very materialistic person, even a small, tiny amount of caring will show your spouse that you care. So this is a very, very important thing to keep in mind as well, that growth, that it could be, just answering that person's question, it could be you're setting the expectations too high, and you have to set much more realistic and smaller goals and growth expectations. And secondly, to keep in mind that your spouse and others around you will probably appreciate your growth more than we do ourselves. We can be most critical of ourselves. You know, there's psychologists that have shown that if you take the self-talk that a person says to themselves on a given day, that if another person would say that to us, we can put them in jail for emotional abuse. We can literally, if you think about the negative self-talk that we often give to ourselves. So very important to keep that in mind as well. As far as to your spouse, they can very often really appreciate even your small levels of growth more than we appreciate it ourselves. There was another question here. Let me try to get this out again. Hold on a second. Screen is giving me issues. Hold on. Okay, got it. Okay, this person asked a question. My husband is very hardworking, works very hard at his job, but isn't motivated to do things at home. He wants to relax and watch TV after work. How am I supposed to be okay with this? I want him to daven, learn, get out, exercise, be present at home and with the kids. And basically, she's saying that he works hard in his job. She appreciates that, but he isn't motivated to do things at home. He just wants to relax and watch TV after work. How am I supposed to be okay with this? I want him to learn and grow, etc. My answer to that question is twofold. First of all, it's very possible that the spouse, the wife in this particular case, is not giving her husband enough space, okay? And this is not the place to talk about this topic right now, but one of the most important things, I talk about this almost ad nauseum, is in a healthy relationship, we have to give each other space. We have to make space for the individual. And one of the challenges during the quarantine was that the space was much more limited. But we need to give space for each other. One of the reasons why it's usually not a good idea to work with your spouse in the same business is because you're not giving each other space to be your own people, your own person. It could be that this spouse, this wife, needs to allow her husband to have a certain amount of time where he knows that's my space. For an hour, I don't know, after the kids go to sleep, he has an hour to do whatever he wants and just to let off his steam for the day and give him more space. That's number one. It could be that he's not getting enough space. However, it also could be that for whatever reason, he's not so motivated to make changes in his life to be a healthier person, more active, more physically active, more with the kids, etc., and all these things. This is an extremely challenging situation because as a spouse, it's very, very hard to try to get your spouse to make these type of changes. Usually it causes a lot of resentment and negativity when you even bring up these topics to your spouse. I don't have a clear, simple solution. My only suggestion I would say is, first of all, try to do those things yourself. Don't worry about your spouse. Try to do those things yourself. And healthy growth is contagious. When one spouse sees the other person being healthier, it tends to make them want to be healthier also. That's number one. Number two, we want to stick with some people call it the 5-to-1, the 10-to-1, the 4-to-1, positive to negative comments. So if you find your spouse doing something that you do feel is good, make sure you mention that a lot, and that definitely will encourage the person to do other things that are healthy as well. We have a few other questions over here. How can I resolve issues with my husband if we disagree on many aspects? What should I be working on to grow? So this is a very broad question. Maybe I just ask the person who asked that question to reframe the question in a little bit more specific, what their question is. The next question is, I want him to work with me to motivate the kids instead of spending so much energy in trying to motivate him. Now, this is obviously an issue, and when we have different perspectives between us and our spouse as far as how much motivation is healthy with the kids. Is it healthy to motivate them a lot, not as much, etc.? One thing I would just say to that person is that be cognizant of your family background versus his family background, your expectations versus his. And just because you assume that the healthy amount of motivation is maybe what you grew up with or what you think is healthy, be aware that that may not be the healthiest thing. And one of the advice I would give that person is to go speak to an outside, non-biased third party and actually find out if maybe the motivation you're trying to do for your kids might be too much. You know, motivation is a very tricky thing. If we try too hard to motivate people, we turn them off. And one of the very interesting things about marriage is that we tend to marry people who are emotional equals, but we also tend to marry people who are somewhat different from us. We're attracted to opposites, where a person who's very timely might be attracted to somebody who's more relaxed, and they can complement each other well. Sometimes it doesn't work as well, and you have to learn to accept the other person. But it's possible, let's just take this as an example, it's possible that you and your spouse have different approaches. Maybe you're more of a type A personality and your spouse is more of a relaxed person. And as a couple, that makes you work well together. But now when it comes to bringing up your kids, you assume that the right way to bring up your kids is to be type A's, and your spouse assumes the right way to bring up kids is to be relaxed. And this can be a difference. And maybe you have to find a middle ground between the two, because the same way you and your husband, marriage works well, hopefully it works well, because of the fact that you found a way to balance the two. Maybe you and your spouse need to also do the same thing with your children to find the balance between the two. So we have another question over here. I know we aren't supposed to expect anything from our spouse. However, if your spouse actually likes to sit and talk and listen to you, and you tell the spouse the thing that actually bothers you and the small things you would like from them, and the spouse still doesn't do it, should we just give up? Okay, so I'm going to just take this apart a little bit. I know we aren't supposed to expect anything from our spouse. I don't think that's accurate, that we are not supposed to expect anything from our spouse. I think we are allowed to expect a lot of things from our spouse. I think we have to have realistic expectations from our spouse, but we are allowed to have expectations. If your spouse actually likes to sit and talk and listen to you, that's a very good thing. And you tell the spouse the thing that actually bothers you and the small things you would like from them, and the spouse still doesn't do it, should we just give up? And my answer to that question is, no, don't give up. But also realize that just because you told someone what bothers you doesn't mean that person necessarily is going to be able just on a dime to change their personality. We know that to make a change in our personality is a tremendous amount of effort to change a character trait. And if your spouse asks you to, let's say, put down your phone when I talk to you, but the spouse is addicted to looking at their phone 24/7, which is an unfortunate reality that many of us struggle with. Just because you told them not to doesn't mean they're just going to be able to just not do it. So just be conscious of that this might be a significant struggle for them. I just want to go back before we, if anyone else has questions, please feel free to message them to me. I'll try to respond to the question that was a little bit open-ended before. How can I resolve issues with my husband if we disagree on many aspects? What should I be working on to grow? So basically, if I understand the question correctly, the person is saying that we disagree on many things. And it sounds like this person feels overwhelmed by the amount of disagreements they have with their spouse. Maybe they see the world very differently from them, and they constantly feel like they're jamming into each other. Okay, hold on. They actually are clarifying the question as we speak. Hold on a second. So the person is asking that since I suggested they have a growth-oriented perspective, how can they resolve issues with their spouse if they disagree on many aspects? So my answer would be is start small and start small, have realistic goals, and also maybe you need to accept that it's okay for you and your spouse to disagree about a lot of things. Sometimes, again, sort of going back to what I was speaking about before, we have certain assumptions in our mind that in marriage, we're supposed to always see eye to eye. We're supposed to always have the same view. We're supposed to always, if my spouse is liberal, I have to be liberal. If my spouse thinks this, I have to think this. A healthy marriage is supposed to be like that. And I think maybe what you need to incorporate, again, I don't know your situation so well, but it could be what you need to incorporate into your mindset is that it's okay for you and your spouse to see things differently. It's okay for you not to have the same perspective. And sometimes just becoming comfortable with the differences makes it a lot easier to focus on the really important ones that are really crucial to face and to deal with and to compromise on. But if we have an assumption that we have to agree about everything, we end up fighting and arguing about so many different things that are actually, it takes away a lot of energy from the relationship. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I think that is an important perspective to keep in mind, that it's okay to not agree about everything, and it's okay to see things differently. Because just going back to your question, how can I resolve issues with my husband if we disagree on many aspects? And again, the question, potentially is, are you trying too hard to see things eye to eye, and not accepting enough that you're different from each other, and that's what makes you both unique and special? Any other questions? Okay, you can chat it, you can post it, or we can wait till next time. It's been a pleasure, everyone. I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos. Tomorrow, on the same link, emetarish.org/live, 10 a.m., my father will be giving over the Sfas Emes, beautiful ideas on the Sfas Emes. Also, with this same link, next week, we have Rabbi Kraft every morning at 12 o'clock, Sunday through Thursday. Rabbi Yochanan, 11 o'clock as well every day. We also have Sunday night, Mrs. Kigel is giving a very fascinating lecture. And Monday night, Dr. Perlman is continuing her parenting workshop, also the same link. Tuesday night, Rabbi Maximov, and Wednesday night, Rabbi Yochanan. And then Thursday night, we will find out soon. Okay, somebody is asking a question. I'm not really sure I understand the question, but they asked it to everyone, so maybe they can clarify the question. Not really sure I understand the question about Shomer Negia after marriage. I'm not sure what the question means. Maybe they could clarify the question. Okay, so this person is asking a question about during the time when a husband and wife are supposed to be physically separate from each other, how they're struggling with being physically separate during that time. So I'll tell you my perspective that I take on that. First and foremost, that's usually a good sign that you have a good marriage, okay? Because if you didn't feel that need to be close to each other during that time. If it was like, oh, we're not able to be physically close now, like, wow, this is great, I'll go read my novel, that marriage is probably not the healthiest and strongest marriage. So first of all, from a perspective, the fact that it's hard probably means that the relationship is actually strong. Okay, that's just a perspective, I would say, first and foremost. Secondly, although I can't go into depth about the concepts of family purity and everything like that at this moment, but I would suggest that you keep in mind, one of the things that I very often talk about when I do relationship classes is the triangle. I call the physical, emotional, spiritual triangle that make up life. All of life is those three things: spiritual, emotional, physical. And how in a really healthy relationship, we want to make sure that the emotional, the physical, the spiritual are all strong. And each one should be building each other. Think about like a triangle within the triangle. And one of the things that happens when you can't be physically close with someone is that if you have a really healthy relationship and you have a growth-oriented perspective, you say, why don't we use this opportunity to become more emotionally close? Because sometimes if we're just physical, that could be a Band-Aid for a lack of true emotional connection. So one suggestion I would have is to try to use that time, not to ignore each other, but to spend time with each other, to get to know each other in a deeper level. Again, I don't know if this relationship, what point of the relationship, maybe you could tell me if this is the beginning of a relationship, or it probably makes a pretty big difference what point of the marriage it is. But I would say that it's an opportunity to focus and strengthen the emotional side of the relationship during that time. And lastly, I mentioned previously, a few minutes ago, about the importance of having your own individuality within marriage. And I think one of the beautiful things that the laws of family purity does is it reminds us that the other person is a separate human being. The fact that you can't sleep on the same bed as that person, it's jarring. It's like, but aren't we one? What happened? Why can't I be close with that person? Why can't I be physically close with this person? It seems weird. It seems strange. And I do believe at a certain level, the message is, obviously we keep these mitzvot because Hashem told us to keep the mitzvot. And because it's God-given, it affects us on many, many different levels, physically, metaphysically, spiritually. But I believe that one of the messages that it gives us subconsciously, the message is, it reminds us that that person is a separate human being. And why is it important to remember that that person is a separate human being? Because if I remember that that's a separate human being, I'm not going to take that person for granted as much as I would otherwise. And one of the biggest problems in marriage is we get so fused with our partner that we stop respecting their individuality. And when you stop respecting the other person's individuality, then their ego actually gets much louder. And this is a whole separate discussion about this topic, but I do believe within the laws of family purity, we have an opportunity to remember that this is a separate person, which should hurt. If it doesn't hurt, something's wrong. But that pain is not about creating separation. That pain is about not taking the person for granted and ultimately getting closer to them as the relationship progresses. I often ask this question to couples before they get married. And I say, now that you're getting married, do you become one or are you still two individuals? And it's a trick question. And I have to say, I enjoy sometimes seeing their responses. But the reality, I believe, is that you're not one with your spouse. Kabbalistically, spiritually, your souls become one. The ketubah makes a commitment to be faithful to each other, but you're still two individuals striving to become one. And how do you become one? And I believe more than anything else, the way you become one is by never stop respecting each other's individuality and never stop respecting your own individuality, which is very counterintuitive. But ultimately, if you do that, if you take the other person for granted, or you take yourself for granted, you're not going to be able to fuse and become one. Because what happens when you respect someone else's individuality? What does it make them do? It makes them respect your individuality. But an even deeper thing happens when you respect someone's individuality. Your ego gets very quiet. And when your ego gets quiet, you actually let go of yourself and you allow yourself to become one with your spouse. There's a few other questions that came in over here. During arguments between husband and wife, usually men argue with logic and women with emotions. How can we find the middle ground? Now, this is obviously somewhat of a stereotype because there's many situations where it's the other way around. Women are not always the emotional ones, but let's say you have a situation where your spouse is more logical and the other spouse is more emotional. How do you find the middle ground? So again, my approach to that would be is being cognizant of this. Both spouses, if they're cognizant of this, Rabbi Jacobson has a fascinating, such a great class. If you haven't watched it, watch it again. He gave it for Emmet called How to Like the People You Love, and exactly really talks about, addresses these differences between men and women. He says men are like waffles. They put everything into a little box. Women are like spaghetti. Everything gets mixed in together. And he has this hysterical little piece there where he talks and he gives an example of a husband who's sitting with his wife, and the wife sees that the husband is really able to open up and talk, and she starts talking to him, and everything she says he files into a separate box. And you have to watch it. I don't want to give it away, but it's worth watching it. There are very big differences, but if we can learn to appreciate the differences, and it makes a very, very big difference. So I think, again, the solution is not so much to fix this problem, but is to be cognizant of it, and for both parties to try to work around that. The other question that okay, this person is saying, we're going back to the question of the time when a husband and wife are not able to be physically close with each other. What if the pain of separation isn't expressed in their spouse? What if this is a husband writing? What if I feel that she doesn't even care about this time, and she doesn't appreciate that this is difficult for him? So this is a good question. I would suggest that person speak to a rabbi or a therapist privately about this, because it might be worth to try to understand this pain that this person is having, and maybe this person does need to work on becoming more emotionally expressive, because sometimes when people are looking for physical, very often, what I found is that it can appear to the spouse as being, oh, this person just wants physical, but in reality, that person might not be trained to express themselves emotionally, and the only way they really feel close to their spouse is when they're physical. And it could be what this person needs to do is to work on themselves to become more emotionally expressive, and maybe that's what their spouse needs and makes it hard for their spouse to understand what they're not getting from their frustration. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that this relationship might need some help in other ways. Like it could be that the wife or the spouse, in this case, the wife, may not feel like her needs are being taken care of to a certain extent. Maybe she doesn't have enough time for herself, and she feels like she's always there for the kids or the husband or somewhere else, and that's creating a certain amount of resentment and negativity in her. And we know that the marriage killer is resentment, and it could be she's built up a certain amount of resentment because maybe she, in her mind, feels like he has it easier. He just comes and he goes and this, and she's become resentful of the expectations on her. And it could be that she just needs to have a little bit more her time to take care of herself. So there's a lot of different possibilities, but I would just sort of throw that out. Okay. I think that's it. I'm not 100% sure, but God willing, we're going to continue this next Thursday, and we'll continue it. I think what I would like to do next Thursday is do this as a question and answer type forum where people send me questions in advance or during the thing. I think this question and answer forum was very meaningful. So God willing, next Thursday we'll continue with the questions. I think there was. Okay, one final question here. The person says, I think it would be beneficial for my spouse, my husband, and myself to speak to someone to help fine-tune our marriage. But my husband is adamantly opposed, is very opposed to speaking to someone about the relationship. So it's very hard to force somebody to talk to someone else, especially some people have negative stereotypes or assumptions, or maybe bad experiences speaking with others. I don't have like a clear, great answer. My best suggestion would be that person goes themselves and gets help themselves. One of the big misnomers in relationships is people assume that it takes two to tango, it takes two to fix a marriage, it takes two to break a marriage. I don't agree with that. Very often all it takes is one person to be the bigger person, to work on their character traits, to become a better listener, and that changes the dynamic of the relationship and allows for much healthier patterns. I'll just give you an example of this. One of the things I talk about in that class before wedding is I talk about something called the infinity loop, or we'll call it the positive reinforcement, but the negative type of positive reinforcement. What does that mean, the negative type of positive reinforcement? So in science, right, if you have two microphones next to each other, it creates a deafening sound, right? I only know this because my father's a scientist. A hurricane is created through positive reinforcement. Again, this is not the good kind of positive reinforcement. This is the tropical indentation that starts off on the coast of Africa that turns into a hurricane in Florida or in Cuba. And that's because of the cycle of the air, and you can read how this works. Now, how does this play out? Feedback loop, somebody quoted that, right, exactly. How does this play out in a marriage? So I'll just use an example that I often use, but there could be many different examples. Let's say you have I'll call it a wife who has an allergic reaction. We'll call it an allergic reaction to somebody raising their voice. Maybe because she grew up in a house where people used to scream, yell at each other. Maybe she's sensitive to sound. She has a sensitivity to it. Whatever the reason is, if someone raises their voice, she goes into a shell. Now, her husband is a really great guy, but he has an allergic reaction to being ignored. Okay, and again, this could be reversed. The wife could be the other way. Her husband could be this way. Let's just use this example. The husband doesn't like to be ignored. You can scream him in his face. He doesn't mind. But if you ignore him, he gets upset. And imagine this couple's doing really well, and then something triggers this guy. Something happened at work. One of his employees was disrespectful to him. Something happened. He's not feeling well. Who knows what's going on? And he raises his voice at his spouse. Meanwhile, how does she react? She goes into her shell. When she goes into her shell, what does he do? He starts screaming louder. The more he screams, the more she goes in her shell, and it becomes this feedback loop of this feedback loop. How do you stop that loop? The answer is shut off one mic. If one mic shuts off, the whole thing calms down. And then they start thinking, you know what? Maybe we're actually okay, and we just got into a bad situation, right? And I do think that that's important to keep in mind. And my suggestion to the wife in that case, if her husband doesn't want to go to get help, is she should go herself to get help. And whether it's speaking to a friend, whether it's taking a positive thinking class, whether it's reading books, whatever it might be, work on themselves to be the best that they can be, and hopefully their spouse will come along. Okay, I think we're done. So it's been a pleasure, everyone.
Actually, Rabbi, there's one more question.
Yeah.
How to like the people you love?
How do you, that's the question from Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. We love our Facebook audience. So, hold on a second. I'm just having a little issue with my screen again. Hold on. Okay. So, how to like the people you love. Okay. So, I recommend watching the full presentation from Rabbi YY because he does an amazing job of explaining it. But I'll just give you my take on it, and this is the reason why I chose that topic for him to give at that time. Love is, the way he puts it, and I don't disagree, love is a feeling of oneness and connection, of being one with your spouse. Liking is respecting the differences. And you could feel love with your spouse, you can feel love with your child, you can feel love with your parent, but not enjoy spending time with them, not feel good in their presence necessarily, but you love them. And what his point was, and I think it's such a powerful, important point, is for a relationship, for a marriage to really thrive, there has to be like and love. Like meaning respecting the differences, love meaning feeling that oneness and connection. I would even go a step further and say that the way you come to love is through like. That the only way you fell in love with your spouse, I make fun in my lectures, I make fun of the term fall in love, because fall in love to me implies passivity, implies something happens to you, doesn't come from you. But if you think about how people quote unquote fall in love, it's because they respected each other's differences. They cared about each other. They thought about each other. They were involved with each other's feelings and emotions and thoughts. What happens often when we get married? We take each other for granted. We get dressed up to go take out the garbage, but don't think about how our spouse feels. We're not showing that attention and feeling, and that really is emphasized with the idea of liking and respecting the differences. Rabbi Jacobson beautifully brings this out about Rabbi Akiva's students, because we know Rabbi Akiva's students, the Gemara tells us they passed away because they didn't show proper respect for each other. And yet Rabbi Akiva was the one who said, love your neighbor like you love yourself. And the answer that the Shem Shmuel, the Sakhachav Rabbi, says is that you can love and not like, but you need to both love and like. That's the idea. Okay. Have a hold on a second. I think we have a okay. Have a good night, everyone, and B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see everyone next week, Thursday night. Okay. Good night.